The laughter started before the attorney had even set down his coffee cup. It was not polite laughter, not the kind people hide behind their hands at funerals or swallow out of respect for a grieving room. It was open, comfortable laughter, the kind shared between people who had already divided the money in their heads before the reading even began, and who wanted everyone present to understand that they had won. Eliza Mercer sat at the far end of the conference table and said nothing. She had driven 4 hours from Rifle, Colorado in a car with a cracked windshield and $43 in her checking account, and she was the only person in that room who had actually loved the woman whose name was printed at the top of the document. The offices of Hargrove and Selin occupied the 14th floor of a building in downtown Denver that smelled like climate-controlled air and old money. Eliza had worn her good blazer, aware without looking down that the hem was beginning to fray at the left cuff. She had arrived 11 minutes early, introduced herself to Warren Selin by name, and taken the chair nearest the window where she could see everyone's face. Across the table sat Garrett Dunleavy and his mother Patricia. Garrett was 41, broad-shouldered in the way expensive gym memberships produce, and wore a watch that had cost more than Eliza made in 14 months. He ran a private equity firm he had named after himself, which Eliza had always thought said everything necessary about his character. Patricia sat beside him with a pearl necklace and a tissue she had not used. She had wept at the graveside 2 days earlier in a way Eliza had watched carefully. 3 small dabs at dry eyes, a composed turn toward the assembled relatives, a murmured exchange with the funeral director that involved her business card. She was not a cruel woman in the dramatic sense. She was the kind of cruel that gets called practical by people who benefit from it. Eliza was 27 years old and owed the Centura Health Billing Department $19,400 from her grandmother's last hospitalization, co-signed because Dolores had been in pain and the forms needed signing, and Eliza had been the only family member present. She also carried $11,000 in student loans from a nursing program she'd left when her own mother's health declined. What Eliza had, and what no one at that table except Warren Selin appeared to understand, was time. She had driven the 4-hour round trip to Glenwood Springs every single weekend for 2 years and 11 months. Not because anyone asked, but because Dolores had taught her gin rummy at age 6 and had once sat with her through an entire February night after Eliza's father left and never came back. She and Dolores had watched nature documentaries and argued about the outcomes, planted tomatoes every May, neither of them much good at it. She had been there for Dolores's last hospital stay, her second to last, and the one before that. Garrett had sent flowers twice. The cards said the same thing each time. Warren Selin read the bequests in the measured tone of a man who had delivered good news and difficult news enough times to know that tone was the only thing he controlled. The house in Glenwood Springs, appraised at $640,000, went to Patricia. The investment accounts, totaling approximately $380,000, were divided between Garrett and his sister, who had not attended. The furniture, jewelry, and vehicle went to various cousins. Then Warren Selin reached the final line. "To my granddaughter Eliza Mercer," he read, "I leave the property at 1407 Teller Creek Road, Pitkin County, Colorado, being the original cabin structure and surrounding lot of approximately 0.8 acres, assessed by the county at $7 for tax purposes due to condemned status. No further assets are attached to this bequest." The room took one breath together. Then Garrett laughed. It was a short sound at first, almost involuntary, and then it opened into something fuller when Patricia looked at the ceiling the way people do when they are trying not to join in. He leaned back and looked at Eliza with the expression of a man who had just watched someone draw the wrong card from a deck he had stacked. $7, he said. Gran left her a $7 cabin. He paused long enough. I hope the property taxes don't put her under. Patricia made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was not a laugh either. 3 weeks before she died, Dolores had been sitting up in the hospital bed installed in her living room. The afternoon light came through the cotton curtains sideways, the way it does in October in the mountains, and Dolores had been watching Eliza fold laundry with the attention of someone committing a thing to memory. "The cabin is worth more than it looks," Dolores said. Eliza smiled the way you smile when someone you love says something that doesn't quite connect. "Okay, Gran, I mean that precisely," Dolores said, her voice carrying the quality it got when she was more present than usual. "Precisely." Eliza folded a pillowcase, set it on the pile, moved to the next one. Dolores was on pain medication. There were days when she spoke in fragments. Eliza had not pressed. She wished, driving home on the dark mountain highway 2 weeks later, that she had. Eliza looked at Warren Selin and said, "Is there anything else?" There was not. She signed the transfer documents, thanked him by name, and walked out before anyone could say anything else to her. She drove to Pitkin County alone on a Saturday morning in November, with canvas work gloves, a borrowed crowbar, a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee that had gone cold somewhere past the Gunnison River. The GPS lost the address twice. The road to 1407 Teller Creek became 2 packed dirt tracks through pine and aspen not cleared in years, and her car bottomed out twice, crossing a shallow wash. The cabin appeared through the tree line like something that had given up. A single-room structure of rough-cut timber, gone silver-gray with age, roof partially collapsed on the eastern corner, front steps rotted through, all 4 windows boarded with warped plywood. A county condemnation notice, printed on orange paper, was stapled to the doorframe, the staples themselves gone orange with rust. Eliza stood in front of it for a long moment. Then she put on her gloves and moved the cinder block propped against the door. She spent the first day clearing debris, pulling down the collapsed ceiling section board by board, dragging waterlogged planks outside, sweeping decades of pine needle and mouse nest from the floor. The work split a blister on her palm before 2 in the afternoon. She wrapped it with a strip of cloth and kept going. She drove home in the dark with wood dust in her hair, ate cold soup from a can, and went to bed without showering. She came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. On the 3rd visit, pulling up rotted floorboards in the northeast corner, she noticed something that stopped her mid-swing. The floor joists there ran at a slightly different angle than the rest, perhaps 10 degrees off from parallel. Enough that, if the light wasn't right, you'd never catch it. She crouched and pressed. The boards held firm. Everything else gave slightly underfoot with rot, but this section was solid. She knocked with her knuckle, dense timber. She knocked 2 feet to the left. The sound was different. She came back with a rubber mallet, a chisel, and her flashlight. The section she was looking for was behind the east-facing interior wall. She found the seam on her 4th careful pass with the beam, a vertical joint running floor to ceiling, packed with the same grime as everything around it. But when she pressed her palm flat and leaned, she felt the faint resistance of something on a pivot rather than fastened to framing. She worked the chisel in and pried. The panel swung inward on 2 iron hinges set so deep in the timber they were invisible from the room side. Behind it was a space approximately 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide, built deliberately into the gap between the exterior log wall and a false interior wall of matching rough-cut planking. Someone had built this on purpose, and they had known exactly what they were doing. Eliza shone the flashlight inside. 3 rough lumber shelves ran floor to ceiling along the interior log wall. On the bottom shelf sat a wooden crate, inside wrapped in oilcloth sealed with candle wax, were gold coins. She lifted one and held it in the beam. American double eagles, $20 face value, minted before 1933 when the government had called them in. She counted them with hands that were not entirely steady. 87 coins. On the second shelf, inside a hinged tin box, were smaller objects wrapped individually in chamois leather. She unwrapped one. The stone inside was the color of pale water caught over a fire, colorless and not colorless at the same time, with a depth that shifted as she moved the light across it. 31 total, rough and uncut. She was not a gemologist. She knew enough to recognize what category of thing she was looking at. She wrapped them carefully and put them back. On the third shelf, held flat beneath a smooth river stone used as a paperweight, was an envelope. The paper inside had yellowed at the margins, but was fully intact. The handwriting was Dolores's, the same hand that had written shopping lists on the backs of church envelopes and birthday cards that always said more than what was printed. Eliza sat down on the floor of the hidden chamber, with the flashlight between her knees and read, "Eliza, if you found this, you did what I knew you would. You came, you looked, you did not stop when it was hard and cold, and made no sense. That is everything I ever tried to teach you, and it seems it worked. Your grandfather Cecil built that chamber in the winter of 1938. He did not trust banks after what happened in '29, and he did not trust people who smiled with their mouths, but watched with their eyes when money was discussed. He filled it over 40 years and never once talked about it at the dinner table. The coins are double eagles, 80s. 7 of them. A man named Porter Adgate at the Adgate Coin and Bullion Firm on Colfax Avenue in Denver knows what they are worth now. Call him. He is old and careful, and he will not talk. The stones are raw diamonds, 31 of them, from a mining contact Cecil had in the Cripple Creek district. A woman named Dr. Sheila Vance at the GIA assessment office in Colorado Springs can tell you what they are. She is very precise, and she does not gossip. There is one more thing. In the tin box beneath the coins, under the false bottom, press the left corner, and it releases. There is a document. It is a mineral rights deed to 41 acres of subsurface land adjacent to this property. Cecil bought those rights in 1944 for almost nothing, because no one thought there was anything underneath. There is natural gas there, not a small amount. I had it assessed quietly in 2009 by a geologist named Farrow out of Grand Junction. He put the value of a lease at somewhere between $900,000 and $2 million, depending on what the market does. His written assessment is in the envelope with the deed. A man named Ray Tilson at the Colorado Bureau of Land Management in Glenwood Springs confirmed the deed is valid and recorded and clear. Call him. Garrett will come when he suspects he missed something. He always does. He will bring an argument that sounds reasonable and a person who sounds official. Call Deb Harlan at Harlan Legal in Glenwood Springs before he gets there. Not that other firm, Deb. She has been waiting for your call since April of 2022. Tell her the cabin was worth more than it looked. I should have been clearer when I had time to be clearer. I was afraid of saying the wrong thing, so I said almost nothing, which was worse. You drove 4 hours every weekend for 3 years when no one else came at all. You sat with me through the bad nights. You never once made me feel like a burden, even when I was one. I am proud of you in a way I do not have the right words for. I am telling you now because I ran out of time to tell you in person. I love you, Eliza. That was always the whole point. Grand Dolores, she read it twice. Then she folded it carefully along its original crease, placed it in the inside pocket of her jacket against her chest, and sat in the dark with the flashlight off, listening to the wind moving through the pines outside and the tick of old timber settling around her. She called Deb Harlan Monday morning from the parking lot of the Silt Diner before her shift. I've been waiting for this call. Deb said, without any preamble. "Since Dolores came to see me in April of 2022. Tell me exactly what you found, and don't leave anything out." Eliza told her everything. Deb listened without interrupting. "Don't move anything from the property. Don't discuss this with anyone in the family. I will have a bonded appraiser at the property Thursday morning. Be there at 9. Porter Adgate drove up from Denver in a truck older than his expertise required. He examined each of the 87 double eagles under a jeweler's loupe, with the unhurried focus of a man who had stopped performing his reactions for observers. When he finished the last coin, he looked at Eliza directly. "At current spot price for gold, and accounting for the numismatic premium on pre-1933 issues in this condition, you are looking at somewhere between $9,000 and $12,000 per coin." A pause to let the arithmetic settle. "I would recommend a formal written appraisal before any of these leave the property." Dr. Sheila Vance arrived 2 days later from Colorado Springs with a portable refractometer. When she set down the last stone and removed her loupe, she chose her words. "These are natural diamonds, rough and uncut. They average approximately 1.4 carats each. The clarity runs higher than I would expect from stones of this provenance and era. If they cut the way their internal characteristics suggest, the total retail value is going to be somewhere north of $800,000, quite possibly significantly north." The mineral rights deed, found exactly where Dolores had said, behind the false bottom of the tin box, was submitted by Deb Harlan to Ray Tilson at the Bureau of Land Management. The deed was valid, recorded in Pitkin County since February of 1944, covering 41 acres of subsurface rights adjacent to an active natural gas formation that 2 energy companies had been quietly exploring for 6 years. Preliminary valuation put the lease at between $1.2 and $1.8 million. The first person from Garrett's side arrived 3 weeks after the appraisals. A real estate consultant named Fletcher in an olive topcoat who named a figure, $48,000. Eliza looked at him without expression. "The county assessed value is $7. Why would your client offer $48,000 for a $7 property?" Fletcher adjusted his smile. "My client has an appreciation for historic mountain structures. The land itself has some. Tell your client that the mineral rights deed covering the adjacent 41 acres has been filed and confirmed with the Bureau of Land Management. All inquiries should be directed to Deb Harlan at Harlan Legal in Glenwood Springs." She looked at him until he understood the conversation was over. Garrett came himself 10 days later in a black Range Rover, too clean for the dirt road, with a man named Coulter, who introduced himself as a Pitkin County building official and carried an enforcement order citing condemnation violations. Garrett looked at the cabin, which by this point had a new roof section, cleared interior, and repaired front steps, and then at Eliza. "Whatever Gran thought she was leaving you, this is a condemned structure with no utilities and a county enforcement action. You cannot use it, develop it, or legally inhabit it. Let us help you clear this up and walk away with something workable." The condemnation order references structural violations that were fully remediated and inspected by a licensed contractor out of Gunnison County. The certificate of reinspection was filed with the Pitkin County Building Department on the 19th of November. She looked at Coulter. "Mr. Coulter should have that in his system." Coulter looked at his clipboard. He looked at it again. He turned to a second page. "The mineral rights deed is recorded and clear," Eliza continued. "The personal property inside the structure has been inventoried, appraised, and documented by 2 licensed specialists whose reports are part of the county record. Deb Harlan at Harlan Legal will address any further concerns with your attorney." Garrett stood very still. The Breguet Classique caught the flat Tuesday light. Then he walked back to the Range Rover without another word. Coulter followed him, moving quickly. Garrett filed a formal challenge in Denver District Court 6 weeks later, arguing that the coins, stones, and mineral rights document constituted uninventoried estate assets that should be redistributed according to the will's proportional structure. The hearing was before Judge Constance Mbeki in Courtroom 7. Deb Harlan made 3 arguments. The first was textual. The will transferred the property at 1407 Teller Creek Road, along with all structures and their contents. Personal property inside a transferred structure transfers with it. No inventory exception was required. The second was evidentiary. The contents had been professionally inventoried, appraised, and reported to relevant county officers within the legally required period. No procedural failure, no grounds for challenge. The third argument Deb delivered quietly, without drama. A forensic accounting review of Garrett's inherited investment accounts, submitted as part of his own discovery package, revealed a margin liability of $260,000, not disclosed to the estate at distribution. The $380,000 inheritance Garrett had celebrated was, net of that debt, worth approximately $120,000. His challenge to Eliza's inheritance was being brought by a man who had, himself, received less than he believed. Judge Mbeki ruled for Eliza Mercer on all 3 grounds. She said 4 sentences. One of them was, "The challenge is dismissed with prejudice." By June, the 87 double eagles had been appraised at a total value of $942,000. The 31 diamonds, cut and certified by a gemological laboratory on Larimer Street in Denver, came back at $908,000 combined. The mineral rights lease, signed in April with a natural gas company out of Houston after a competitive process, Deb Harlan managed with precision, paid an initial signing bonus of $380,000 and would pay annual royalties for the duration of the formation's production life. Eliza paid the $19,400 owed to Centura Health on a Thursday morning by check in person at the billing window in Glenwood Springs. She paid the student loans by phone that afternoon. She kept the meal delivery job for 8 more weeks because she had roots she had driven long enough to care about, and people along them she wanted to say a proper goodbye to. She rebuilt the cabin through fall and into winter with a contractor who worked carefully and did not hurry. She kept the original log walls. She kept the hidden chamber cleaned and dried, with new shelves built to the same rough dimensions as the old ones. She put nothing in it. It was not a storage space anymore. It was something else. The kind of thing that does not need a name to be understood. Garrett Dunleavy's margin debt came due in the spring. His firm restructured quietly. There were no headlines. Eliza did not follow it closely. On a Saturday morning in early December, she drove the 4 hours back to 1407 Teller Creek Road, alone. The snow had along the dirt track carried it in heavy, patient silence. The cabin had a new roof, new windows, a cleared path from the road to the front steps. Smoke came from the chimney because she had left a banked fire that morning. She parked and stood outside in the cold for a while without moving. The cabin is worth more than it looks, not figuratively, precisely. She had been holding a pillowcase and she had smiled and moved on, and she understood it now, not as a riddle, but as the truest thing a person can say about anything that matters. That the value in a thing lives where the looking is, and the looking itself was what Dolores had been watching her practice for 30 years, every small, patient, careful act of it, without ever once calling it by name. She went inside. The cabin was warm and smelled like fresh timber and pine resin and clean wood smoke from a fire that had been burning long enough to become a hearth. She put the kettle on. That was enough. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the things that look like nothing are sometimes everything. What is something in your own life that turned out to be worth far more than it first appeared? Leave it in the comments below.